Hi, Damalie.
Hi, Melissa.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Glad to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Yes.
Yeah, how have things been?
Been a little busy. Been a little busy. And how about yourself?
Been busy too. Been busy too, but I couldn't wait for us to get to this title today because I think the reason why we are doing it, I think, is as we work with different people, different clients, many people don't have the tools or the skills to navigate in relationships. And even as we were talking last week, we talked about listening to understand when people are talking to us. I don't know about you, but I remember I used to interrupt people a lot when they were talking. When we would have conversations, I'll be interrupting because I feel like when the person said something, that was the moment that I would say something that was on my mind. I wasn't even aware that that's very inappropriate, or it was very uh it was very wrong. I don't know, how do you feel for you when it comes to when you're listening or people are listening to you? What was your experience?
It is definitely something that I had to learn because I had the same. I think everybody has that situation because this is what we've been taught. Listening to respond is the first reaction that we get, right? Because if you're saying something, automatically I want to answer that because maybe by the time you finish, I'm gonna forget what you said or what you asked. So I want to get to it right away. And through counseling, I had to take a step back and allow the person to finish without interrupting because you can come off as very rude,
Yes.
or even your body language, to me, I think that was one of the hardest thing to do because going back to temperaments, right? As a sanguine, I'm easily distracted.
Yes. Yes. And that's
So,
the traits that sanguines do have, is like people, they walk away in mid-sentence when people are talking to them and they don't even think that they are doing it.
and I did that often, or not only that, you're talking to me and I would lose you in the middle of the conversation because I was not interested.
Yeah.
So, and that happens a lot. Like you're telling me a story and something more fun is going on next door. I lost you and now my ears are on the other conversation.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and it's not that you do those things intentionally, but it's like everything else, it takes practice.
It just takes practice. Because first of all, the awareness that you're actually doing it, because many times people just stop interacting with you because they don't like to experience that with you without telling you that what you're doing is very rude. They think you're doing it on purpose.
Yes, absolutely. Another thing that I thought that it was very difficult through the process of teaching myself how to understand the other person was that they'll tell me a story and I'll try to relate myself by telling the same a different thing that it was similar. So now I lost the focus on the person that I'm supposed to be listening to them and I made it all about myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like if I minimize the interest of the other person's story, and I think that's very rude.
Yes. And that's the lack of being aware that we are doing these things. Like I said, I think we are expected in life to know how to behave and how to interact and how to socialize, how to relate. But these are skills. These are things that take time to practice and cultivate, to learn to do, as opposed to assuming now you're 50, you should know how to do this. But if you've never taken the time,
Yes.
you would never understand how to do those things. It's kind of, even many times when I'm expressing this or explaining it to some people, I use the analogy of driving a car. It's a
Yeah.
skill. Just because you want to drive doesn't mean you can. Unless you
Yeah.
have that skill to drive, you won't be able to drive the car. So it's easy for a person to understand, like, I need to have a driver's license to drive,
Mhm.
but they don't think you need to develop the skills to communicate well, to resolve conflict well, to articulate things in a way that you want them to be heard and understood. They assume the other person, if you really care, you should know.
Mhm.
How often have you seen, especially in couples counseling, where this person feels like, I've always told you this, I'm every day I'm saying this to you, and the other person is like, I don't know what you're talking about. And this person is feeling like, I've been talking to you until my face is blue. but you don't understand. You just don't care. That's why you don't listen. You don't care. Not realizing that when we communicate to each other, our brains interpret information very differently. Like you say, like you're a sanguine. When information excites you, you're intrigued, you're curious. But when it becomes more familiar to you, you get bored and you want another exciting topic and another exciting topic. Now, I'm a melancholy to the most part when I used to interact with people. I always wanted to talk about conversations that were important. Like if I'm reading a book and you're talking about like a trashy TV show, I'm not interested in what you're talking about, you know?
Yeah.
So
Like you lost me there.
exactly, because we are just involved. We are by nature as human beings selfish, but the intentionality of becoming more inclusive of people when they are interacting with you so that it's not just about you.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And like you said, that you see that a lot in couples and you see that a lot in parents and children.
Yes,
That's
yes,
where I see it the most, and I think that as parents, we're not paying enough attention to
yeah,
our children because either we're on their phone and they're talking to us and we're like, yes, 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 that we're not even looking at them. And that's the number one thing that we want to do to have healthy conversations is lay everything to the side and be able to interact with our eyes,
yes.
saying at least making a movement or say yes, like okay, I'm all in, I'm paying attention, and I'm definitely, I cannot say this enough, I am a victim to this bad habit because it could happen to me with my little one that he's talking to me, I'm like, yeah, 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 and I'm not even listening and I feel terrible. And he said, Mom, I'm asking you a question and I'm over here yesing him to death. So I have to apologize. And I said, Papi, we'll talk at home when I'm not driving because I have to pay attention to the road. But I have to be mindful that even those little people
Yeah,
deserve the right to have an actual conversation. And he's gonna learn that.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. Because they say charity starts at home.
absolutely.
So the things we learn, that's why I think a lot of times they never equipped us. Like I grew up in a boarding school. I mean, which teacher is gonna take time with all these kids like running around teaching you communication skills? You don't have your
Yeah.
parents to help you, so we had to learn these skills at an older age, and I think it's very crucial, even as we are doing this video, to help people first of all to know you have to be realistic to know that no one ever gave you those skills, so you don't have them,
Yes.
and being in to observe how you communicate, how you interact when people are talking to you, and when you're talking to people, how does that exchange look like? Like I said, I used to interrupt, and maybe every once in a while I still do interrupt, but I'm mindful of that.
Yes.
So that you listen, waiting for the person to finish their point before you interject yourself into that conversation. Because if they don't feel heard, then it's like you're not showing interest, and that's one of the skills of show interest when people are talking to you.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and
Absolutely.
they feel like they have your attention to even share more things. Sometimes our body language is like you're talking to me, but I'm over there, like you said, you're on the phone, you're doing other things, you're multitasking. And if this is something that is important to the other person, then that you're giving them the mixed messages that I don't have time to listen to what you're saying to me. And as
Yes.
a result, I'm out. I'm not talking to you. And so that's when, I've had sometimes when people say, you don't talk to me. And then when you talk to me, you just lash out at me,
Mm.
you know?
Hmm.
And they are looking at the lashing out as the problem. I always ask the question, what do you think you have created when you talk with each other? How have you contributed to that space where your partner doesn't feel comfortable talking to you? Because it's easy to be upset that they're not talking, or when they talk, they lash out at you. What have you become aware that you do when the other person is talking to you, so that you can see if you have contributed to it? In which ways?
Well, what I've applied even in my own personal relationships is that I definitely, because again, bringing back to the temperament, I have the tendencies to be very explosive when I'm upset, and then I lash out and I might say things that I don't mean later. And then later on, I lashed out and I'm like, okay, so what do you want to eat kind of situation? Like once I
Got it.
vomit it all out, now I'm okay. So I've learned, well, I'm still teaching myself because those are tendencies that constantly you need to practice as you go. Because it's very hard to control your emotions at times. As counselors, we have to be transparent and say, we're dealing with the same things, but with the only difference that we do have the tools to do things in a healthier way. So I've learned to put myself to the side and say, we'll talk about it when my emotions come down a little bit. Especially with my husband, I said, right now I'm not ready to talk, but once I feel better, then okay, I'm ready to talk. He's a phlegmatic, so he's very passive. I'd say that he's a saint because he has a lot of patience for me.
Yeah.
However, he wants to talk about it. We sit, we talk about it, and it gets better without the emotions. Same thing with your children. You don't want to say hurtful things to your children. You want to make sure that you're not correcting your children under your emotions, because now you're lashing out. He or she is going to put the walls up, and now it comes into defensive mechanism, because that's what happens. Once we get those lashes out from other people, you're like, okay, I closed up. I'm not hearing you. All I hear is this.
Yeah.
So it's not healthy.
Safe. Like you're not safe for them anymore, because
Absolutely.
once you don't feel like I can depend on you, I can rely on you, and I can believe that you're interested in what is bothering me, then
Yes.
it's very hard to communicate, or it's easy to communicate. So
Yeah.
what do you think about temperaments and how different temperaments communicate? What have you noticed? Because we have like 5 temperaments, but we also have blended temperaments.
Yes.
For some people who don't know most about, we're talking about temperaments, what would you highlight for the ways you've observed different temperaments communicate?
The communications between all the temperaments, I would have to say that, of course, like I mentioned, the sanguine, it's a lot more free spirit. That if I'm interested, I'm listening. If I'm not, you lost me kind of situation. So it's definitely somebody that really needs to learn this skill, because it's not something that you have the intentions to do, but it's a natural reactions and is a natural tendency. So it is very important for a person with that temperament to be mindful of those things, so they can say, okay, this is the area that I need to work on to be successful. Because especially in the business, right? When you're doing business anywhere, whatever kind of business you're doing, you want to have that skill, because you have to earn your respect out there, and people are going to listen to you more once they know that you're listening to them.
Absolutely,
You
absolutely.
know?
And so for
Um,
some, when they have a hard time listening to people, even if they're interested in people, they really have a hard time listening to them.
yes.
So for them to just sit and tolerate a conversation that they are not interested in is really not easy. Just like a melancholy,
Yeah.
you know?
With the difference that the melancholy will engage, right? I think that a melancholy person temperament would engage in a conversation, like you said, that I'm gaining some knowledge out of it, because as melancholies are very intellectual. So if you are feeding my mind, I'm all in. And they will give you great attention. I mean, there is no better attention than a melancholy's attention.
Yes.
Now when you move over to the cholerics, is a little bit hard, because they only hear what they want to hear.
What's beneficial to them?
Yeah, so it's like they eat the meat, they throw out the bone kind of situation. If I can't use this, then I don't want it. Which it can come off kind of rude sometimes.
Yeah.
So again, teaching yourself to know that everybody's opinion matter. Even if we don't like it, how do I respect it? Because of course you're never gonna be in accord with everybody the way they think, because everybody thinks differently. But having that respect to listen to them and understand them is
Absolutely.
very important.
Absolutely. And then, one of the temperaments I personally appreciated the most was the supine temperament. because they feel before they think. Their emotions run faster than their thoughts, and there is nothing wrong with it. So as supine will just feel like you're not safe for me to talk to you, and they will not say anything. Many
Mhm.
times they'll be like in a triggered state of being because they're maybe frozen and they are not talking.
Yeah.
So if you're not mindful of listening to other people, you just don't think that they want to talk to you, and you just keep on talking, 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 talking without realizing, like, wait a minute, have I created the space for that person to talk? Because I think I used to flood supines. I would just like go, 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 go. And they would just be there not talking. And I'm like, what's going on? Why don't you say something? Without, I was so unaware. First of all, I flooded them.
Yeah.
Second of all, they may be in a triggered state of being. Maybe I'm so opinionated that they don't even know how to bring up their opinion to me, and I was not aware of all those things. And that's why it's very crucial when you're interacting with another person, not only just observe yourself, observe them too. Body language, if they're not talking, don't over talk.
Yes. Not only that, but remember that supines, they operate under the impression that if I do or say something that they don't like, they're not gonna like me. So because, and it's sad to say it, but there are people that are naturally like that. And we have to be aware of those things, that they are people pleasers. So even if I don't have that ideology, just so you can continue to be my friend, I'm going to agree with you.
Yeah,
And it's very toxic for them, because now their needs are not being met because they're so compassionate. And I say that there's not a better heart than a supine's heart, because
right.
they love people, they love to serve people, and it's like they'll do anything for the other person before they do for themselves. But
Yeah,
this is how you create codependent relationships. That's
exactly.
dangerous.
Yes, yes, because they have a hard time expressing themselves.
Yes.
Like they have to feel safe and wanted and appreciated and invited for them to feel okay to communicate and express themselves. So if you don't know that about them, you just ignore them because you don't know how to relate to them.
Yes, no, absolutely.
They-
And finishing up with the phlegmatic, I think they're perfect.
yes, yes, yes,
I mean, I am a blended temperament, and thank God for my phlegmatic, because that's definitely what sets the bar for me. It eases me up.
yeah,
But again, I can be stubborn, right? We can be a little bit stubborn,
yes,
but we definitely care. We have a lot of empathy, because you have to have empathy for other people. You have to.
yes, yes.
Mm.
And I think, I have phlegmatic tendencies in myself, but one of the things that I noticed in how we communicate in phlegmatic tendencies is that we under communicate because we don't want to lose so much energy. It takes so long for me to explain all the details. I'll just give you one line, and if it doesn't make sense, then that you don't need all of that information. So I get to decide whether do you really need that information or you don't. And then based upon my judgment, then I communicate that. So by default, phlegmatics tend to under communicate, and then they think they communicated it because in their mind you didn't need to know that information. So the other person is like, you could have said that in their mind, but you didn't need to know that information.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that within even yourself?
Yeah, I see it all the time, because it's like I thought about it, so I think that because I already thought about it, it's already done. Or I don't know if this happens to you, but I get a text message, I read it, and I answer it in my mind, and I put my phone down. I never send a text message. And I mean, this is terrible, because people might think that you're being rude, you're not replying, you're
Yeah,
ignoring them. But in reality, because of that part of your temperament, it's like, all right, I already answer you in
yeah,
my head. You just did not get the answer. And it is rude.
yes,
It is definitely something that you have to continue to remind yourself and work on those areas, because those are our weaknesses that we have to continually work and work and work.
absolutely. And I think as we are closing, to really remind people that if a relationship is important to you, you have to fight for it. Don't assume that it's gonna work itself out in a vacuum. We have to work on our skills. We have to help people know their blind spots as much as we open ourselves for them to tell us where our blind spots are so that we all can grow, because
Yes,
it takes an effort on all sides. Otherwise, people just cut people off like that. Just
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And they
Because of
don't,
the lack of communication, you might end up great relationships, great friendships, you
yeah,
know, only because if you have that idea of, well, you know, I'm responsible for what I say kind of idea, right? It's like, no, I have to try to make myself responsible for what the other person understood because maybe they understood it the wrong way.
yeah,
So having the time to know that those relationships are being built in a good way of
yeah,
communication and understanding. I cannot emphasize that enough
yeah.
because that's the main key, understanding each other.
Yes, and you have to show some form of interest to be able to hear the other person. You don't have to agree with them, but because it's important to them and they're talking to you, at least take some effort, be genuine, and
Mhm.
show some interest so that you can hear what they're saying.
Absolutely.
So, how do people get to know you? How do they connect with you from here on YouTube, and where do they find you?
Okay, they can find me. I have my Instagram page at New Creations Counseling NJ. My website is also newcreationscounseling.org. They can find me there to book a session. You know, they can write to me, they can email me, they can subscribe to my website so they can get newsletters. And I'm still working on my YouTube channel, which is going to come up pretty soon.
Yeah.
Thanks to you. Thank you so much for helping me with building my platforms because like I mentioned to you in the past video that, you know, everything is word of mouth and people, you know, a lot of referrals and things like that. But I have to really, now that technology is everything, I have to really put myself out there.
Everything
To
is
be
on
able
the
to
internet. Everything is on the internet. People buying groceries on the internet, okay? So
I do that.
exactly, you can buy produce on the internet. So everything has to be available at least. So for those of you that would like to connect with me, they can find me on forerunnercounseling.com. My handles on Instagram and Facebook are the same, Forerunner Counseling. So we will talk to you guys again next week. So
Yes.